Hello, lovely listeners. I am lover woman Les Kami, and I am back with the 5th episode of Thalassophobia. Wow, I can't believe we're on episode 5 already. Small milestone, I know, but still a milestone all the same. If you're on this video, then I assume it's appropriate to say thank you very much for sticking around long enough to get to this episode. I do truly appreciate it. Summary in the description as always. Now, without further ado. Part 1. Shattered Idealism. Vitala knew what it would take to truly be a part of Reveldad. Her fascination with demons had to die. When she retired to her bed after watching the band play, she made a promise to herself that she would never go back into the forest. As she made this vow, she felt a surprising amount of freedom. If she was no longer sneaking around, then there was no reason for her to feel shame or like she was hiding something. This feeling of freedom was so strong that it produced a second: excitement. If all that was stopping her from belonging in Reveldad was a simple interest in that with which she should not be, then she would nip that interest in the bud. Matthias was right. Vitala did not belong in the world of demons. She belonged with humans, and it was time to embrace that fully. Over the next few days, Vitala threw herself full force into Reveldad. She went to as many events as she could: apple bobbing, dog racing, eating contests, fight betting, and much more. Vitala particularly enjoyed fight betting. 2 men or 2 women would gather in the middle of the square and test their strength in a number of ways. There was arm wrestling, regular wrestling, punching each other until one gave in, and even sword fighting. It reminded Vitala of the South, but with a twist that only the North could provide. In Trakova, 2 women wouldn't be caught dead wrestling each other into the dirt. The idea of publicly being dirty was unthinkable to many of them. However, it was perfectly normal for women in Reveldad to get covered in sweat and mud as they settled their bets physically. Krona had actually participated in an arm wrestle with a woman who was twice her size and lost terribly. Far from being upset, Krona looked at her with fire in her eyes and propositioned her to show her what else her hands could do. The woman scowled, pointed to a heavy-set woman in the crowd, and told Krona that was her wife. Krona's response to this was, "She can join us too." If not going to events, then Vitala spent her time walking down every road she could get lost on. Her favorite road thus far was the one that led to the library. There was one book there that Vitala found particularly interesting. It was called the Book of Now. It was very large and turned to a blank page every single morning. It was the first thing you saw when entering the library, and people were allowed to write about what was going on in their lives. It was like a communal diary. The only rule was that you had to leave your name somewhere in what you wrote. It was interesting to Vitala to see so many different handwriting styles in one book. Some were large and short, while others were small and long. Others were obviously written by children, while others had shaky scrawl so commonly found in the elderly. Vitala always assumed the ones with a lot of profanity or dirty jokes were written by teenagers. Once she had discovered the Book of Now, she visited its display every day, as it was the best resource to learn about what was happening around her. Some of the things people wrote were scandalous. Like the woman, Kaylin, who spoke of her husband cheating on her. Others were sad. Like the old man who spoke of his wife passing away after 52 gorgeous years together. He actually did not leave a name, but Vitala thought he lived in the house that had a bunch of flowers set on the doorstep that day. Children wrote of getting new dogs and cats. Couples wrote of anniversaries and births. Teens wrote of fresh relationships and newfound heartbreak. Vitala found each entry to be riveting, no matter how small it may have seemed to the person writing it at the time. She didn't write anything herself. She felt like it'd be quite bold to assume that the happenings of her life counted as Reveldadian news, but she hoped one day she'd feel welcome enough to. By the time the eve of Krona's beach party rolled around, Vitala felt as though she traversed Reveldad with more confidence. As she took Porkchop on his morning walk, she ran through what she thus far knew about the itinerary in Reveldad. Jack ran the bar. Avery and Soph ran a toy shop that was popular with children. Marie ran a bakery. Holden was the name of the butcher that gave Vitala fish and rice on her very first day. Sander was the name of the man who ran the flower shop at the end of town. The fact that she could recall this list with ease filled her with joy. A less joyous feeling was the pang of longing she felt when she glanced towards the forest. She had been standing idly as Porkchop took a squat in a tumbleweed, and her eyes seemed to naturally drift in the forest's direction. The leaves looked particularly green and inviting today, and Vitala ached to explore. To combat this feeling, she looked pointedly away from the forest and ushered Porkchop deeper into the town square. She ran through her itinerary list a few more times as she and Porkchop made their way back to the lobby of the inn, only stopping when an uproar of sound hit her ears. The source of it turned out to be Elaine and 3 people surrounding her. One was another woman whom Elaine was currently hugging, while the other 2 were a significantly older man and woman with salt and pepper hair. It seemed like some sort of reunion. Vitala's curiosity won, and she stopped to watch the scene. It took a moment for anyone to notice her, but the first one who did was the woman hugging Elaine. The 2 pulled apart, and the woman looked at Vitala. Wow, Vitala thought. She was beyond gorgeous. Her face was heart-shaped, lightly dusted with freckles, and was currently adorned with a dazzling smile. The clothes she wore complemented the attractive, slender curves that she had, and Vitala even found the way her body slanted to the left when she shifted her weight there alluring as well. Almost at once, a feeling of disgust came down on Vitala like a strike of lightning. Against her will, a memory clawed its way to the surface. I always thought you looked at us weird. Abigail Green was hissing at her. Me and the rest of the girls. I always thought you were undressing us with your eyes, you disgusting weirdo. Vitala's heart had pounded in her throat. Her hands rested against her thighs, her grip strong enough to leave marks. She wanted to tell Abigail that she was wrong. Vitala had never looked at her weird. Nor had she looked at Piper or Olivia weird. She had no interest in them. But was it possible she hadn't been nearly as careful as she thought? Had her feelings towards Ambrose sometimes shown in her gaze? That wasn't outside the realm of possibility, unfortunately, as Vitala often felt like her feelings were akin to a fountain about to crack from overflow. But even still, why should she feel ashamed? Her feelings for Ambrose were warm. They were the kind people wrote romance books about, the kind that produced walks on the beach and secret telling under stars. Why was Abigail speaking like Vitala's feelings should be the source of endless shame and repentance? And why on earth did Vitala feel like maybe she was right? Vitala had hoped that the moment she crossed into Reveldad's borders, these feelings that plagued her so would disappear. She realized how foolhardy she had been as she looked at this woman now. She felt sick in more ways than one, as her thoughts tortured her with the question of, how would she feel if she knew you were looking at her in the way that you are? If the past was anything to go by, she'd react very, very badly. Vitala knew the polite thing to do would be to leave the lobby, not force this woman to be around her any longer. But this would not be an easy endeavor, as everyone in the group had turned to look at Vitala by now. Unexpectedly, a weight was applied to her left boot. She looked down to see Porkchop, his front paws on her, gazing up at her with a low whine. She smiled, grateful for him pulling her out of her thoughts, and bent down to pick him up. "Is that dog yours?" asked the man with salt and pepper hair. "You must take good care of him. His coat is quite shiny." "You should see her horse," Elaine said. "I've never seen such a beautiful mare. It's like she's made from silk." Vitala blinked. She had no idea that Elaine thought that way. "Do you work with animals?" asked the man. Vitala wasn't sure why he was so interested, but she nonetheless said, "I had to learn a lot of home care to take care of mine. I've never gotten any official training, but I know what to do when they get sick or injured. My parents work with small animals," Elaine explained to Vitala. "Guys, this is Vitala. Vitala, that's my dad Elijah, my mom Jimena, and this is my sister Josie." She smiled brightest when introducing her sister. Vitala had never seen her like this. There was so much childlike glee radiating from her. She was usually a bit like Matthias, flickering about, fretting about what needed to be done. Right now, however, she looked young and carefree in the presence of her mom, dad, and sister. "Well, aren't you different?" Josie said. Her voice was smooth, and Vitala's heart quickened at being addressed by her. "It's been a while since I've seen a face in Reveldad I don't recognize. I, moved in a few weeks ago." "Moved in? Gosh, with our reputation, I can't believe anyone would move in." "I said the same," Elaine nodded. "But I'm glad she did. I've never seen Elias so bright around anyone before." "Oh?" Josie said with interest to Vitala. "How'd you meet Elias?" A part of Vitala wished Josie would stop speaking to her. Another part never wanted to stop listening to her voice. The conflict made her feel queasy. "He took a liking to my horse, and I helped with his. Poor thing just had the flu and needed some rest." "Amazing," Elijah said. "My wife and I have never had much veterinary experience with horses. They're not too common in Reveldad. It broke our hearts being unable to help our grandbaby when Arrow got sick." "It's okay, Dad," Elaine said soothingly. "She's better than ever. You should see her. She has almost as much energy as Elias." "Why don't we go?" said Jimena for the first time. "It'd be nice to see the kids." There was a general murmur of agreement amongst the family. Elaine turned to Vitala. "Do you want to come with us?" "No," Vitala said, perhaps a bit too quickly. To lessen the awkwardness, she added, "I should probably decide what I want to wear to Krona's beach party tomorrow." "Krona's throwing a beach party," Josie said. "Knowing her, she'd probably like you to wear nothing at all." Jimena smacked her daughter on the arm. Vitala, however, was sure she became a shade of red not yet known to mankind. "Krona's great and all, but can we please go see my grandbabies?" Elijah said, with a pleading look to his family. They all turned to leave, but not before politely saying goodbye to Vitala. Vitala let out a breath when the lobby was cleared. She looked down at Porkchop, who had gone quiet in her arms. Clutching him tighter to her chest for comfort, she slowly walked up the steps to her room. Once there, she let Porkchop down and slid down her door, her knees drawn up to her chest. Her heart was absolutely hammering. What on earth was that? Vitala groaned as she realized how idealistic she had been. How could she have been so naive? But then, hadn't naivety followed her throughout her entire life? This was just the newest installment. She liked to believe that she was just a hopeful person, but it was hard to currently give herself that amount of grace when she considered how many times hope had come to bite her. Even though it was so long ago, It still carried a bite to think about how she had been stupid enough to believe that she and her teenage crush could ride off into the sunset together one day. It didn't matter that they were two girls from the South. Vitala had been in love, and surely that was enough to ensure a happy ending, right? Vitala laughed bitterly as her eyes began to sting. She tried to blink away the feeling, but all this accomplished was making tears fall down her cheeks. Before she knew it, she was weeping into her knees. Porkchop whined and went to curl up beside her. Part 2. Black Rock Beach. When Vitala awoke on the day of Krona's party, it took her a few moments to remember that it was taking place. She had spent so much of the past day ruminating on dredged-up memories that she was still feeling pretty miserable even after a full night of sleep. She pressed her palms against her eyes and internally groaned at the prospect of being around a crowd of people. She'd much rather stay in bed, but what good would that do? Did she really want to spend another day thinking about her past when she could be socializing with those who would be in her future? She sighed and got out of bed. Not having much in the way of beach attire, she settled on some old shorts and a white top. Beach or not, she wasn't comfortable showing much skin. She called for Porkchop and made her way outside. After making sure Willow was fed and her stable clean, Vitala went to the town square, which was more deserted than she had ever witnessed. Most of the shops were closed, and the ones that were open made her realize exactly why that was. Business was abysmal. The scattered shopkeepers looked at Vitala with hope in their eyes, and she apologetically smiled at them before turning towards the forest. As promised, Krona had tied a rope around the trees that lined the path she had taken. Vitala lightly brushed the rope with her fingers and gazed out along the path. Much like the town, the forest was quieter than usual. This helped ease the part of Vitala that desired to stray from Krona's path. She told herself that there would be nothing interesting to see, since the demons were likely as far as they possibly could be from where Krona had trodden. Well, so what? Vitala thought, shoving away the guilt she felt at the words. If the demons had been scared away, then that was a good thing for me and the rest of the people in Reveldad. She started her journey along the path, Porkchop tagging behind so he could sniff and mark as he pleased. Clearly he missed the forest too. Vitala wished she could explain why they didn't go into it anymore. For something to do, she grabbed a long, skinny stick from the ground and broke it into numerous tiny pieces. She wondered how many people would be at this party and began to preen at the thought. Did she look okay? These shorts really were old, faded and in need of some light patchwork. What would everyone else be wearing? Would she stick out? The smell of salt water hit her nose and her thoughts capered away as the beach came into view. Once she stepped over the tree line, she immediately noticed three things. 1. There was a thick layer of calm surrounding the beachgoers. It wasn't until it was absent that Vitala realized that there had always been some level of anxiety hanging over the people of Reveldad when they were in the town square. Though it was common for young children to be carefree and play around in the town square, the adults rarely did. Now, however, people of all ages were lounging and playing in an unguarded way that Vitala didn't think they ever would if they were in town. 2. There was a huge black cliff off to the right that stood out sharply against the rest of the beach. It looked like someone had carved it out of the darkest of shadows. It hung over the ocean in such a way that Vitala was surprised no one was attempting to jump from it. 3. This beach was not as new to Vitala as she thought. When looking out over the water, a lighthouse could be seen in the distance. It was the exact same lighthouse depicted in the painting that hung over her bed. The words of the painting came back to her. She will win again. Wait. Vitala stared at the ocean. Wait. Vitala, right? Vitala's thoughts screeched to a violent halt at being addressed by that voice. Even though she had only heard it once, she didn't need to be reminded who it belonged to. Her throat felt uncomfortably dry as she swallowed thickly and turned to look at Josie. Much to Vitala's chagrin, Josie was wearing a yellow-striped bikini that complemented her beauty. Vitala's eyes betrayed her as they took in Josie's exposed skin. Her glistening thighs, stunning curves, cleavage. Fighting the urge to die, Vitala did her best to focus on only Josie's face, but the sunlight made her freckles stand out and turned her eyes to an attractive shade of brown. She seriously debated running into the ocean and just not coming up for air. Instead, though, she said, "Yes?" in an unattractively cracked voice. Why did Josie have to smile at her like that? "I know this is completely out of the blue, but my parents wanted to ask if you'd be interested in working with them." It definitely was out of the blue. What? "They were really charmed by you, I think. My dad kept talking about how beautiful your dog is, and then we went to visit the kids, and Elias kept talking about you. He was elated when we said we'd already met you. Said you two were best friends and you like horses too. He talked about what you did for Arrow, and, long story short, my parents would be honored to have you on their team." "Oh," Vitala said, completely surprised. "I'm really not a doctor or anything special like that. You knew that Arrow had the flu. That's more than my parents were able to figure out. They've always had to turn down sick horses because they don't have the experience. I know you're from the South. You've probably noticed we don't have horses here like you guys do. If you're willing, my parents would love to have your knowledge on their side." Vitala didn't know what to say. Yes, she knew what to check for when horses got sick. She knew common ailments and how to cure them, but was she really bold enough to label herself as someone who could work alongside actual veterinarians? But then, if it was true that sick horses went without care in Reveldad because nobody knew what to do with them, wasn't it better for Vitala to at least try? She could touch upon her skills by way of reading. She could hone what she knew. She already knew a lot, if she could be immodest for a second. Besides, she really did need a job. Her money bag was not getting any heavier. "Okay," Vitala said with a surprising amount of resolve. "Okay?" Josie said, beaming at her in a way that rivaled the sun. "I'll tell my parents. They'll be so pleased." She reached out a hand to pat Vitala on the arm. The contact made her heart flutter, but it was nothing to how she felt when Josie added, "I don't know if my sister ever said, but Elias doesn't get along well with many people. You must be special. I'd love to see you around more. Maybe you can tell me why you decided to come to a place like this." With that, she smiled and walked off. Vitala's heart was beating so fast that she was certain her chest would have a bruise in the morning. Josie wanted to see her more? Did that mean something? What if it did? Vitala blushed and covered her smile with a hand. But then, what if it didn't mean anything at all? What if Josie was just being friendly and Vitala was being disgusting by taking it the wrong way? If she accepted the job, would she be able to keep it if it came out that she found Josie attractive? Even worse, what if Elaine found out and kicked Vitala out of her inn? Vitala's thoughts spiraled until she was thinking about how it was wrong of her to be at the beach at all. She was surrounded by scantily clad women. She felt her very presence was impure, and she felt like she should save these women from her immorality by leaving. However, for the second time that day, Vitala's name was called. This time it was Krona coming towards her. She was wearing a black bikini top with matching modest trunks. Not for the first time, Vitala envied her physique. She really was sculpted from muscles. "Hello, Krona," Vitala said. "Welcome to Black Rock Beach," Krona said, throwing her arms wide. These words made Vitala remember what she had been thinking about before Josie approached her. She stared at the black cliff behind Krona and wondered if her suspicions were right. Krona turned to where Vitala was looking and, as if reading her mind, turned back with a huge grin and said, "That's where I threw the dog from." She looked quite proud of herself as she mimed picking up something heavy and throwing it. "I dragged her up the cliff myself. Made sure she saw how many people she had hurt so badly that they gathered around to watch her sink." There was unmistakable venom in Krona's tone, and Vitala wondered what it would be like to hate someone that much. Sympathy for Morel flashed inside her, but she rushed to kill it. Recalling her vow, she did her best to smile at Krona. It must have been a convincing smile, because Krona absolutely beamed in response and said, "Feel free to make yourself comfortable. There's food and drink, and if you get bored, I'll be with my friends in the water." "Thank you." Krona winked at her and left her to her own devices. Vitala actually was hungry. She went to one of the vendors and bought something for her in pork chop. She sat in the sand and ate side by side with him. As she did so, she looked out at the beachgoers and was surprised to spot the girl she had met in the kitchen lounging against the sand. She looked paler than ever, but was also happily looking out at her surroundings. Vitala smiled to herself. She was absolutely certain that the girl was not supposed to be here. Her mother was probably throwing a fit at her disobedience. Good, Vitala thought. She still remembered how that woman had grabbed her daughter's arm. Vitala was the last person you would catch disparaging a girl for going against her mother. To her surprise, Josephine, who Vitala didn't know had come to the beach, approached the pale girl and sat by her side, handing her a drink as she did so. They seemed to be friends, which made Vitala strangely happy for the girl. Vitala wondered if it was Josephine's idea to have the girl sneak out in the first place. Yes, that seemed the sort of thing two kids would plan. Porkchop drew Vitala's attention by whining. He was looking longingly at a group of dogs that were playing with a ball. "Go then," she said. "I'll be fine, buddy." He didn't leave her side right away. Instead, he reared up to lick her face and then rushed to go make some new friends. Vitala watched him for a bit with a smile on her face. She wished she could make friends as easily as that. Not in much of a mood to do anything in particular, Vitala sat and soaked up the sun rays for a while. When she started feeling the desire to take off her shirt, she decided to go for a swim. Nostalgia hit her as she approached the waves. She loved swimming. It was the most fun way to combat the southern heat, and it was one of the few things that produced good memories of the South for her. The coolness of the water was like a loving kiss against Vitala's skin. She didn't take up Krona's offer of joining her and her friends, but she was near enough to them to be able to see that Krona was looking up at the sky with a frown. She seemed unusually pensive. Vitala flipped onto her back and floated there, looking up at the sky too. She closed her eyes and tried to let the waves lull her to calm. She began to think about Josie. There was so much she wanted to know. For instance, Elaine was hugging her like she hadn't seen her in a while. Where had she been? Would she tell Vitala? Was Vitala even brave enough to start a conversation with her? She groaned internally and turned herself upright so she could plunge her head into the water. Far from clearing her thoughts, she instead began to think of Morel. This was the ocean she had been thrown into. Knowing this made Vitala feel slightly scared. She imagined what it must be like to not be able to break the surface of water for a full year. She tried holding her breath for as long as she could, and was certain she didn't even reach a minute before needing to come up for air. As she spluttered, she considered how truly awful it must have been to be trapped here for so long, to not be able to come up for air, and then having to drown all over again. Vitala closed her eyes. She would not think about this. If it became known that she felt sympathy for Morel, she would never be able to belong in Reveldad. With a great deal of effort, she closed her heart and decided that what had happened to Morel was none of her business. Besides, didn't Krona say she had hurt so many people that they gathered around just to watch her drown? At the time, Vitala had wondered what it would be like to hate someone that much, but now she wondered what it would be like to do things so awful that people gathered around for the sole purpose of witnessing you die. Was it possible Morel had deserved her fate? Vitala couldn't imagine how that could be, but then she hadn't been in Reveldad when Morel was ruling it, had she? This line of thinking was making Vitala depressed. The day was truly beautiful. She shouldn't be spending it like this. Even Porkchop was having fun by digging in the sand with his new friends. Vitala looked over at where Krona was and saw her having a vibrant conversation with the woman surrounding her. After a moment's consideration, Vitala swam over to them. Krona welcomed her with open arms. Part 3. Captured. Trying to sleep was a useless endeavor. Vitala twisted and turned underneath her covers to no avail. The day had left her with much to think about, and her brain was far too full of thoughts for her to drift off. Porkchop, who usually enjoyed sleeping in bed with her, had grown frustrated with her restlessness and opted to sleep on the floor instead. After 5 more minutes of trying and failing to get to sleep, Vitala decided to expend her excess energy by taking a walk around the town square. She got up, pulled on a coat, and made her way down the stairs of the inn and through the double doors at the front of the lobby. The night was surprisingly quiet. Nothing but the rustling of leaves and chirps of crickets could be heard underneath the luminous full moon. It cast a faint silver glow on everything its light touched, and the night's breeze was a pleasant reprieve from how hot the day had been. Why everyone was inside on such a beautiful night, Vitala did not know. She was just getting used to the silence when something started approaching her at a quick pace from the other end of the square. She felt a pang of fear. A demon? Vitala had not brought anything to defend herself with, and something told her she did not want to be caught unarmed in the presence of a demon that was brave enough to walk into town. However, it was not a demon at all. In fact, it was perhaps the furthest thing from a demon you could possibly find. Krona? Vitala said, squinting against the darkness. Vitala! Krona responded, coming to a halt a respectable distance away. She looked relieved. God, I thought you were a demon. I thought you were one too. Krona huffed with just the barest trace of humor. She did not seem like her usual self. None of her boisterous or prideful energy was with her. In fact, she seemed rather tired. As if reading her thoughts, Krona said, I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. Krona gave her a soft, genuine smile before pointing at a group of big rocks in a corner of the square. Sit with me? The two walked over and sat down side by side. Krona frowned up at the moon, and Vitala could see the shadow of eye bags beginning to form on her. It's superstition, I know, but I can't help it, Krona said, as if continuing a conversation. Seeing the look on Vitala's face, she explained. The full moon. Wolves. Oh! Vitala said, everything suddenly clicking for her. Is that why everyone is inside? Krona nodded. Some legends say that wolf demons get stronger under the full moon. Honestly, I'm not too sure that's true, but I patrol in case the dog decides she wants to surprise us. That's why I thought you were a demon. Most of the town doesn't dare to come out on nights like these. Vitala was once again struck by how many people feared Morel. It seemed almost comical that Vitala had eaten dinner with her and slept in her cabin, all while walking away completely unscathed. To her, Morella was rather sickly looking with her thin frame and haggard appearance, not someone to fear. Honestly, if Morella got into a fight with an actual dog, Vitala would put her money on the latter. She had no idea how someone like that had convinced an entire town to fear her. She had read the stories and accounts and knew that they weren't false, but what she had read and what she had thus far experienced were just not adding up. Krona continued with what she was saying. I like throwing parties on the days of full moons. Brings us all together to have fun and build camaraderie. You know, remind us that there's a lot of us and we always have each other. It works. The people here seem like one and they love you. And I love them, Krona said with a warm smile. After a bit of silence, her face changed to something far more pensive. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you come here? She sounded genuinely curious, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would do such a thing as move to Reveldad when they had the choice not to. You weren't born here. You have no local family to my knowledge. You don't have any ties to this place, and yet here you are. Why? There was so much vulnerability swimming in her eyes. It was clear that this question and its answer meant a lot to her. Why that was, Vitala did not know, but she did know that she couldn't look at Krona in this state and give a guarded answer. I may not have grown up with demons, Vitala began softly, but that does not mean that my upbringing was free of monsters. For as long as I can remember, I felt out of place in what was meant to be my home. Bigotry abounds in Trakova, and I was like a walking target. Even in my actual house, I felt out of place. I always wanted to be away from my mother. I think the feeling was mutual, honestly. She definitely hates me. Vitala humorlessly huffed at her own words. Krona, however, was looking at her with rapt interest, her eyes wide. Your mother? Hates you? Why would she? Because I wasn't born a boy, Vitala shrugged. And because I'm homosexual. Krona remained quiet, apparently waiting for Vitala to continue. When that didn't happen, she said, How does any of that make you worthy of hate? And that, Krona, Vitala said with a weak smile, is exactly why I moved here. Krona looked down, her expression gravely thoughtful. So, she was cruel to you then? Your mother, I mean. Honestly, she wasn't too fond of anyone, Vitala said quickly. Not even your father. Their marriage was basically arranged. Their families hoped my dad would produce a son that inherited the genes that skipped him. Skipped him? My grandfather is a famed warrior where I'm from. He was bloodthirsty and violent in his youth. Everyone thought his son would be exactly like him. Even better than him, actually. But my father ended up being the exact opposite. Kind, gentle, quick to tears. This unfortunately left him undesirable in the eyes of families who'd otherwise love for their daughters to marry a stone boy. My mother's family was fairly reputable. Not enough to be too picky, but also not so low status that people turned their noses up at them. I've always thought my father only married her to appease his father. Personally, I think my grandfather picked my mom because he thought she toughened my dad up. I hear she was cold even in her youth. Vitala's tone turned noticeably resentful at the end. Even though she could have gone on, she stopped speaking then and looked away from Krona. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sound came from crickets and the occasional breeze that swept over them. Krona was the one who broke the silence. I see you take after your father, then, she said softly. Vitala smiled. Me too, Krona continued. I love my mom, but my dad and I are definitely cut from the same cloth. He used to hunt demons for a living. Oh, wow. So you're definitely a daddy's girl, Vitala teased. As if you're one to talk. Krona playfully shoved her and they both laughed. I've always admired my father, but after talking to you, it sounds like I owe him more than I thought. What do you mean? I was born in the South. My father moved us when I was very young. Don't remember a thing about it. If what you say is true, then he made the right call. Yes, Vitala said. He did. No offense, but you definitely would not survive in the South. Is that what you think? Krona said with exaggerated hurt. She flexed her biceps and made a face that was very her. I think I can hold my own. Vitala huffed in amusement. Nice as it may be to see Krona acting more like herself, Vitala thought that meant this was the end of their honest conversation. However, she was rather mistaken. I'm glad you're here. Vitala looked at her in surprise. Nobody deserves to live like that. The great thing about Reveldad is we know other people aren't our enemies. As long as you're human, you have a place within our town. If you want it to, this place can be your home. Krona gripped Vitala's shoulder in a strong, reassuring way. Something about hearing Krona, the most renowned person in Reveldad, say these words made Vitala feel incredibly heartened. She was about to say so, but the moment was stolen from her by an intense rustling noise coming from the entrance to the forest. Both women sprang to their feet at once. Krona put one hand out to shield Vitala, while the other went to a knife dangling from her hip. Whatever was making the leaves move was getting closer and closer. Vitala's heart beat in her throat. The amount of sound being made was either coming from more than one thing or a very big thing, and she wasn't sure which was worse. Could Krona really protect both of them? Something cleared the tree line. The moonlight showcased two humanoid figures, their heads bowed, with ropes over their shoulders. The way they moved indicated they were dragging something quite heavy behind them. The figure on the left looked up, and the moonlight reflected a familiar face. It was Blightwood. Vitala realized the figure next to him was his son when the boy ran a hand through his hair to reveal his face. Both of them were sweaty and looked beyond spent. Clearly the effort of capturing and dragging whatever was in their rope had taken a lot out of them. Vitala wondered what it was. Aaron, Krona said, visibly relaxing. Is everything all right? Blightwood had a grin on his face that Vitala didn't like. Better than, Krona. I knew there was at least one in that damn forest. If Vitala's heart sank at these words, it was nothing compared to how she felt when Blightwood and his son kept walking to reveal what was being dragged behind them. It was the Aquarius. He had been tied, gagged, and blindfolded. The blood oozing from a long cut in his side was more pink than red, and he looked incredibly weak. Vitala wanted to rush over and comfort him, but she was shocked into immobility. The Aquarius let out a pitiful whinny, and was rewarded by Blightwood scowling and turning to stomp on his face. Vitala flinched terribly at this and took a step back in utter horror. These bastards have blood as good as gold, they're that rare. Been hunting it for a week straight. Ever since my boy said he saw it. Couldn't risk anyone else getting to it. He ruffled his son's hair as if he couldn't be prouder. The Aquarius whinnied again. He was tied up like an animal being prepped for slaughter. Was he going to be slaughtered? The thought was so distressing that Vitala looked to Krona for support. Surely she could see how wrong this was. Surely she knew how intelligent and beautiful Aquariuses were. Surely she couldn't stand to see one treated like this and would do something. She did do something. She smiled. Well, she said, you keep that beast tied up tight. If it gets loose in town, any damage will be on your head. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much for watching.